Hey everybody, Jaycie here. It is October, obviously, and we're having one heck of a good time sharing some really cool ghost stories. I'm excited to be sitting here today because not only are we going to talk about ghost stories, but this amazing guest with me today is also a comedian. And y'all know by now, I like to bring a lot of funny stories to the table. So, anyway, I'm really excited to dive in though today because this is a little different. Usually, I have kind of my virtual kitchen table, but today we're just doing a one on one. So, will you please share with us who you are and what you do? And then I want to dive into these stories.
Yeah, thanks for having me. First of all, I appreciate you having me, Jaycie. My name is Deece Casillas. I am an internationally touring stand-up comedian, writer, host of the weekly podcast, The Social Hour, and I'm also just recently releasing my debut comic book series, Kill Stan, which you can find
Awesome.
on Kickstarter right now. That'll be running through the October 16th. I don't know when this airs, so you can go to if you're into comic books, it's kind of neo-noir crime thriller that I'm putting out. So that's been a fun process too.
Awesome. That's exciting. Fantastic. So, let's dive in because the reason that we connected all had to do with me throwing a call out there for guests that have had paranormal experiences.
Yeah.
So, I anybody that's heard the last episode or two that's come out in October knows that I've had a lot of them, but I want to hear about yours. When would you say kind of started? Maybe do you remember even the first paranormal experience that you had?
Well, I grew up Catholic, so that's pretty paranormal. That's probably the most paranormal thing. You hope it's only the Holy Ghost that's touching you. But it's so that was my first experience, I'd say, but really, jokes aside, the I kind of had like a neutral stance, what I would call an agnostic stance on the supernatural, until I physically experienced it. It was, because it's kind of the same stance I take on anything in life is until I have a personal experience, I'm just kind of like, maybe, maybe not. I'm an idiot. I live in a vast universe with things more. There's way more that I don't know than I do know. Like
Mhm.
I believe in the possibility of pretty much anything.
Yep.
Except for recently, I had someone miss a appointment with me because I told them to meet me at noon and they missed the appointment and they messaged me and said, sorry, they thought noon meant 3 o'clock. And I don't believe in any multiverse universe ever does noon mean 3 o'clock. That is one thing I
No,
guarantee does not exist anywhere.
they were probably in a parallel universe to you, and so on their timeline, it was probably noon.
Yeah, right there you go. So something. I think it was just more a crippling alcohol addiction that maybe
That could be.
hindered it. But the so yeah, I believe I was very agnostic on it. Had never really had any
Mhm.
personal experience of note, I would say. I've had some uh maybe I always had premonitions in dreams. That was probably
Yes, me
the
too.
most,
Hmm.
um, I used to have reoccurring dreams as a
Hmm.
kid, very vivid reoccurring dreams.
Yep.
And I guess it shouldn't say vivid, very they felt very powerful, but they weren't very detailed. A lot of times,
Hmm.
like faces were blurred, things were, but I would have these reoccurring dreams quite regularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes once a year or just sporadically. But many of them eventually came to light. And
Hmm.
were like I'd be living in a circumstance be happening in my life and be like, wait a minute, I this has happened to me before. And then I'm like, oh no, I used to
Yeah.
dream this
Yeah.
from the time
Hmm.
I was very little, like multiple times I dreamed this. So
Yeah.
that was probably the only personal kind of like I guess like a lot of premonition stuff. I've had weird stuff where
Hmm.
like one time someone who I hadn't seen or talked to in like 10 years, hadn't thought about him in years. And one day I was like, oh, that they came to my mind. And then literally 5 minutes later, they were knocking on my door. And I mean, they lived
Hmm.
in a different state, right? And so like
Hmm.
some weird premonition stuff like
I
that.
totally understand that. It's so interesting that you're bringing this up and that this conversation has started this way, because as you know, before we started recording, I made the comment that a lot of paranormal stuff happens around me, but including a lot of my guides coming through again, and just a lot of interesting, weird things happening. And I'm making a pivot in my business. Cat's out of the bag now since we're going to air this. But my storytelling is going to really, which my education is in this, but it's going to really start to focus on the stories and messages in our dreams. And so
Yeah.
it's just interesting. Another one of those moments where that you brought this up. And I think that's interesting. It's one of those kind of synchronistic signs, if you will, that sometimes show up in front of us. But I love it because I don't know all that many people personally that have had the precognitive or premonition type dreams. And it's a very interesting experience when you've had that.
Yeah, it's kind of surreal the first time I realized it was happening, and it's happened a lot since then. I think the first one I was probably around, I would say 17 years old, the first time
Are
one
you
hit.
game to share it? Do you remember it well enough to share it?
Yeah, it wasn't even that, like, the interesting part, or maybe it makes this less interesting, is the moments in life weren't necessarily, at least to me, did not feel like big, pivotal, impactful moments. They were, it was just like one time the first time I remember I was talking to, I just started a new job, the sales job, and my sales manager was this like woman who was like a year or two older than me, kind of attractive. There was a little bit of like sexual tension, and and it just, I'm like, oh, there was this very white room, barren office, and it had always been like this dream of me in this space and talking with this, in this weird like attraction with this woman. And then all of a sudden, just kind of like, it almost like the dream like panned out in my vision, and all of a sudden the person's face became clear. And it was like that feeling, just like, oh, I'm like, this is that moment. And yeah, again, it's none of the moments were very significant, I would say, at all in my life, which is kind of strange. It's not like, oh, I had a premise in this, and that's the day I moved 3 inches to the left, and then the car careened through that driveway. Like, no, nothing. It was nothing crazy like that. So that's always been like the weird part about it
I
too.
completely agree with you because I've said that over and over and over again. I'm like, what information? How's that benefiting me?
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
who cares? Or mine are always just a little skewed, but blatantly obvious when they do show up, but they're a little off. It's not like, and I have talked to people that have had exact things
Sure.
happen. But again, why would they know that some plane crashed and then they see it on television and freak out because
Yeah.
they saw that and they're like, I just dreamed that. And so anyways, but I don't disagree. It's interesting why we have those precognitive ones or the premonitions or knowing things
Yeah.
like you were talking about the individual that knocked on your door and you know it or you think of them before. And it's like, right?
Yeah.
It's just an interesting, for me, I've always wondered if it's more just that validation from that which is beyond us to go, hey, you're not down there by yourself on that planet.
Yeah. Well,
There's
that
other consciousness.
I think that's part of it, but also I've always been very, like, I always trusted my instinct really well, and kind of been in tune with my internal compass, and because I mean, I remember even when, so this may be a little revealing, but statutes of limitations is passed. I was a wayward youth, we'll say. And I remember I'd be, at a party with my homies, right? And we like things would be, I would just get this feeling. I'd be like, we have to leave. And I'd be like, we have to go right now. And I would trust my instinct, and I would leave. And they eventually realized that if I said we had to leave, it meant we got to go, because it just too many times I turned out to be right. But I'd say we got to go, and we'd be like down the block, and that's when the cops would pull up and raid the place, or that's when like a fight or a shooting would break out, and it'd just be like we'd be half a block away, and all of a sudden you're like pop, 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 gunshots. You're like, and I was like, and like, how did you know? I'm like, I knew I
You
had
just
to,
know.
I had to go. So things like that happen a lot in my life.
Yeah, I hear you. I completely get it. And those are important ones, obviously,
Yeah.
but there are so many of those times too where it just, you're like, doesn't doesn't make sense. It makes it easier though, I think, at least for me, when I go, oh crap, I left my AirPods at home. I just did this the other day and I'm like, oh, I don't want I if I'm gonna talk on the phone, or I like to have music in my ear when I'm out and about. So I'm like, nope, I'm driving the 15 minutes back to the house to get my AirPods. And so then I'm like, I can't ever remember leaving them. Not, I mean, for a long, long, long time. I don't. I'm like, okay, there was a reason I left them, and it's
Yeah.
not the knowledge of hey, but it was like, nope, you have to go back and get them. That I felt you cannot go without them, and
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, so there's some unknown thing that probably maybe would have happened that I avoided because I listened to the intuition of like, you have to go back and get your AirPods.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just that feeling, that tug, right?
Yeah, right? And I know when we're talking about, oh my gosh, so recurring dreams are fascinating. And I just had, actually, she just shared, someone commented, and I haven't gotten to respond to her yet, but on a post, I think it was on a reel I did on Facebook. And of course, this is September that this is being recorded. But anyway, and she was talking about having recurring dreams, of course, but also having shared dreams. She said the same dreams as her
Mm,
husband and her daughter.
yeah.
And so those are such fascinating experiences and conversations.
Yeah.
And I've had dreams where I'm one of the few that, and I don't remember, I'm gonna have to do my research, y'all, but there's a small percentage of people that don't normally see faces in their dreams. I'm one of those people. I hardly ever see people, but I know there's people there. There's just
Yeah.
an inner knowing. Um, so anyway, and I usually kind of know who they are, but I don't see their faces. So a few months ago, I had a dream and I saw a person's face looking in my window. I can't believe I'm
Mm,
going to share this publicly. Anyway, whatever, he knows. And then a few months ago, I started dating a gentleman. And all of a sudden, about a week, 2 weeks in, I went, oh my God, that's him. That's his face.
yeah.
Blew me away. Blew
Wow.
me away because I'd never had that happen.
So,
And
so he
yeah.
was stalking you and he knew where you lived and he was watching you and you're like, so this is like Stockholm syndrome. You're telling me is your dating life right now. You're blink twice if you need help, JC. We can send someone to you right now.
I'm still blanking, help me.
uh,
No, but he so then since he knows it, he actually walked up, being silly, walked up to that window one evening when he came over and peered in. I'm like, stop, help. But
yeah.
oh, my face is all red. But it is really fascinating. I remember the first precognitive dreams that I really started having. I was probably a teenager. And they were very, at that time, I was raised in a Baptist church. And
Mm,
so it was very like, those are evil and whatever. And so they freaked me out a little bit. And then I was like, oh no, this is me. This is my life. It's coming to
mm,
me. We're okay. And for all of you curious, I'm a deeply spiritual person, but I'm not a Christian at this point in my life. So, because there's other options, right? Who knows what really is? I just know there's something beyond us. And that house that I grew up in also had the paranormal activity that just seemed to come up. Um, Interesting. And I don't want to just dive into mine because I want to hear about your
yeah.
stories. So, though I could sit here and talk about dreams all day
So
and all
yeah,
the,
yeah.
oh my gosh, the premonitions and all the stuff we started off talking about, I could sit here and talk about it for hours.
Yeah, it's very I think there's a lot to it. But the
Mhm.
if you to get into the meat of my paranormal experience, it would be one house that I lived at specifically. I was it was 2009. I moved from LA, where I grew up, to Spokane, Washington, and I rented this small, it was like a 500 square foot house. And when I moved in, a friend of mine who lived in Montana, she came over because her dad lived in Spokane. So she's like, I'll help you move in while you're, setting stuff up, doing working and stuff, doing things. Because at the time I still had a real job in addition to comedy. So she's like, I'll set up the house and, unbox for you and stuff. And I'm like, oh, great, awesome. And she starts, and a couple days go by and she's like, this house, she goes, I think this house is weird. Like things, I feel like things are being moved around. And I'm like, And I'm like, whatever, like you're high. She smokes weed all day. I'm like, you're just forgetting where you're picking things,
You're
right?
high. You don't know what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Like she smoked weed all day. So I'm like, you're probably just forgetting where things are being put, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and then I get up one morning and I'm getting ready to go to work and I open up this drawer in my kitchen, the new junk drawer, because we all had one back in the day, a junk drawer in the
Mhm.
kitchen. And it was where I just kind of put miscellaneous stuff,
Mhm.
my packings. And I open it up to get a sticky note to write myself a note, as I did every morning. I wrote my to-do list. It's just a thing I do. And there was this mirror, this old, like kind of turn of the century ladies hand mirror, like a little makeup hand mirror thing, right? And it was
Mhm.
old. You could tell it was old because it wasn't the handle wasn't like plastic. It was like this foreign metal and like
Oh.
glass. And the mirror was marred, very like you couldn't get a real reflection from it. It was definitely it'd been around. And I was like, and I kind of pick it up and I go, I looked at him like, what the hell is this? And she goes, I don't know. I go, what do you mean you don't know? She goes, I don't know. I've never seen that before in my life. It's not yours. I'm like, well, it's not mine. And I go, did you unpack this from any of these boxes? She's like, no. And I go, this isn't yours, not mine. I'm like, okay, very strange.
Mhm.
This mirror just appeared in this house out of nowhere. We're the only two people that have been in
That's
this
pretty
house.
wild.
We were unpacked the boxes. It wasn't in that drawer when I moved in. It just
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, strange. So I didn't have time to do
Yeah.
it. Put it back, left. Um, so she, she goes on her way, of course, because it's me living in this house, and after I'm living in the house for a while, I do start to notice there's like a eerie feeling I get, and I'm like,
Mhm.
like where I always feel like I'm not alone, right?
Mhm.
And then there was this in the back. There was this on the floor of the laundry room. There was a door you could pull up and stairs that went to an unfinished cellar.
Mhm.
Floor, small cellar. The furnace was down there. That's about it. I never really went down there. It was creepy.
Mhm.
At first, I never really went down there. But I started hearing things coming from that back room because there weren't any doors. It was all open. There was no because it was one basically open concept. So
Mhm.
like I could hear things happening back there. I started hearing what sounded like footsteps down there. And then I'm like, ah, it's weird. Then I started hearing what sounded like whispering,
Mhm.
like people whispering to each other at night. Then I started hearing what sounded like footsteps upstairs in that back room, like little footsteps of people
Yeah.
walking around and more whispering. Um, and also I started realizing that I was waking up every single morning. I was waking up and I'd roll over and look at my clock and it was 4:13 a.m. It happened every single night. Um, so these things just started happening. I'm like, this is weird. Something is
Mhm.
going on. And then I had a buddy from Portland came and stayed with me for a weekend. And I'm telling him about the house. I'm like, yeah, it's creepy. I hear voices, I hear footsteps. It seems like, it's weird, right?
Mhm.
And and I go, and they live down here in this cellar. And I stomped on the cellar door twice. I went stomp, stomp, and I go, shut up, ghosts. We're gonna try to get some sleep. Don't keep us up. And as soon as we turn around, there's a like something pounds back on the bottom of the door. And I look at my buddy and his eyes are saucers. Like, what was that?
Yeah.
And I go, I told you it's weird, right?
So it's
Like
an intelligent spirit or whatever you want to call it.
some
Obviously, because it reacted.
it reacted. And then I go, so we go to bed, wake up in the morning, and he uh I'm telling him he asked him more about the ghost, if anything else has happened. And I go, well, another thing that happens is I wake up at the same time every morning.
Mhm.
My clock, it's the same time. And he goes, what time is it when you wake up? And I go, it's 4:13 a.m. And he goes, I woke up last night and looked at the clock and remember it was 4:13 a.m.
Woo, that one gives me cold chills.
And I go, "Really?" I'm like, whoa. And he goes, yeah.
Yeah.
Then not long after that, my sister came and stayed with me also. Same situation where the next morning I'm telling her about the ghosts. I tell her about waking up the same time. And she goes, ask the same question. What time? I said 4:13 a.m. She goes, I woke up and looked at the clock last night and I remember it being 4:13 a.m. So two other people besides me having that exact
Yeah.
same experience of waking up at 4:13 a.m.
So
Um,
something must have happened to either whatever spirit was there or there at the house or something at that time. Because that sounds like it's residual,
right.
but where we recur over and over.
I have a theory that I'll posit to you at the end of all this. But um then I had another friend, this other girl who was staying with me for a while, and she also felt these things. And she actually
Mm-hmm.
told me one time that um she thought I came home because I was gone doing shows.
Mm-hmm.
And um then when I actually got home and woke her up, she's like, "Did you just get home?" And I go, "Yeah." She goes, "You didn't come home like an hour ago?" I'm like, "No." I go, "I just came home.
Yeah.
Why?"
Mm-hmm.
She goes, "I swear to God, I saw someone and felt someone come over and like in the dark, put their hand on my shoulder, lean down and kiss me on the head, and then walk away. That wasn't you?" And I go, "No,
Oh,
no,
wild.
not
Yeah.
me."
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
Not long after that, I experienced a woman figure, um, long curly hair, looked like from the shoes, just kind of very silhouette-y, but in
Mm-hmm.
like kind of an old dress, and you come through a doorway and come and same thing, touch me and kiss me on the head and then walk to the back where the back room was where the ghosts were. And I was kind of,
Oh,
it was like a
wow.
sleep paralysis thing. Like I remember it happening,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
couldn't react. Um,
Which is
and
possible because I know some people go, "Oh, you were just dreaming." However, we're more open at that time.
right. Yeah.
Right. When we're in that right at the end of the sleep cycle where the sleep paralysis, those chemicals haven't worn off, we're more open to our dreams, but we're also more open to other possibilities at that
well,
point.
our mind isn't working to justify everything,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like make
Right.
sense of everything. Because I think there's a lot of things we see and that happen around us all the time that we
Yeah.
don't, that we just, our mind just like justifies away, that our mind's
Right.
like, well, this was just that, because otherwise we'd just be freaking out all the time and couldn't,
That's
Um,
true.
so yeah, I mean, it really is amazing. They've done tests like this to figure out how much minds trick people to
Mm-hmm.
keep you just calm and kind of focused
Mm-hmm.
on life. But so at a certain point, things began to escalate a little bit with these whatever wraiths you would call spirits they were in my house. I started to hear them more. They started to not walk around but stomp around. It
Huh.
almost sounded like it. I would almost say it sounded like two people, like two giant adults were wrestling in my cellar. Like that, it
Oh,
felt like you could hear thudding, pounding. The whispering started to become more incessant and louder. It would keep me up at night.
oh wow.
And they did some things like they locked me out of the house one time. One time they locked me in the house where I could the door wouldn't open. It just wouldn't
Oh,
open. And I would just have to wait. And then eventually it would just kind of like I could open it.
oh
Then
wow. How did you feel about that? That would have probably done me in on that one. I
uh
can handle a lot, but that I don't know how to
it
handle
was
that.
disconcerting, but also
Yeah.
so this is I'll kind of tell you this last thing, then I'll get to some of the stuff that kind of gets like my response to this. Um, One of the weirdest things that happened was at a certain point, I um, went outside to get my mail, and the door slammed shut behind me and
Hmm.
locked, which is weird because it was just a deadbolt. So it's not like I could flip the lock and accidentally, it locked. It wouldn't open. And I'm
I
like, okay,
did have that. I'm going to stop you just for a second. I forgot about that. I did a contract and managed a haunted hotel, which is a really cool old historical hotel right here on the border of Mexico and Arizona, where I live.
hmm,
And I did that for a couple of months. I had completely forgotten, but numerous occasions. I had two doors to my office, thank goodness, but one would shut and the deadbolt would get locked, and no one had been in there to do that, and
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that.
That, yeah,
And
that,
it is a very active hotel,
yeah,
paranormally active.
it's not one of those things where I'm like, oh, I accidentally hit the lock on the door when
Yeah.
and even if so, about 20 minutes later, I was able to open it. So like, how was it? Even
Yeah.
if I hit
Right.
the lock on the door, how did that happen? But
Right. Yeah.
so I was just stood out there on my porch for like, probably about 20 minutes, then tried the door again, and I was able to open it.
Hmm.
When I opened it, my freezer, because I could see right through my living room and my kitchen. My freezer was wide open. Well, I couldn't see the freezer yet, but there was a big puddle of blood in the middle of my kitchen. And I was like, what the fuck is that? Sorry.
Right.
What,
That's
what is
okay.
that? What is that? And I like walk in and my freezer is wide open and it's completely defrosted. And all my meat that I had in there had
Yeah.
thawed out and bled to a big pool of
Right.
blood in the middle of my kitchen. And I'd been out there, it'd been 20 minutes. Um,
That's not even possible in 20 minutes.
So right, that's because
Wow.
so I'm like, what that was weird. That was probably the kind of
Yeah.
creepiest thing. And people always ask me, like you asked a moment ago, like that was, when you leave, it's scary. And it really, it was, I found it interesting. And also
Hmm.
I never felt like threatened. Um,
Yes. Gotcha. Hmm.
it felt active and turbulent at times. I mean, there was a moment it got a little crazy around that time, and I really this is a description I used for someone one time, but it really almost felt like my house was breathing. Like
Oh, yeah.
there was this
Okay.
energy
Hmm.
that just like, and it was tense. It was
Hmm.
very tense. What I did realize later, is soon after that, and kind of is that a lot of what was happening in the house was very attached to how my emotional state.
Interesting.
So when the things were most turbulent in the home was when I was the most stressed, probably acting out the most, probably drinking more than I should, doing, like just not in
Hmm.
alignment with my personal walk, um,
Hmm.
and that I think that was creating this energy that was
That's
whatever the
fascinating.
house was reacting to, because a little, probably after about the first 3 years of living there, I kind of got my life together a little more and calmed down and kind of brought things in a little. And when I did that, things really relaxed and things didn't happen as
Huh.
frequently. And when they did, they weren't as
Hmm.
extreme. Because when I first moved in, I was kind of fine. And then it was kind of a pretty little turbulent period in kind of my lifestyle. And I saw a peak with that. And then as it
Hmm.
came back down, things changed again. So the when I finally moved out of the house, they were going to the city bought me out because they were going to tear it down for a freeway. So
Hmm.
they bought me out.
Now
And I
people are just like, did you see
yeah,
that?
yeah, right. They oh, I'll tell you this part first also before I get to the big the dismount. The I at a certain point I finally went down into the cellar and
Okay.
looked around because I wanted to inspect it. And this wasn't that, I
Hmm.
probably lived there less than a year when this happened, and things were pretty turbulent. So I was like, and there was this box of really old books that were kind of about like uh some weird stuff about so like kind of I would call them witchy adjacent, and like Native American spiritual stuff. There were
Uh-huh.
these weird symbols carved into the walls, and there were the old
Okay.
candles everywhere. So
Hmm.
something had definitely happened. Uh, my when I moved out of the house, that mirror, I moved everything else out, and that mirror was still in the uh that
Well,
same drawer.
hmm.
And I remember picking it up and being like, is this supposed to go with me? Do I take this with me? And I really had a moment where I'm like, thought about it. And then I go, and I put it, and my thought process was this, I go, it appeared in this house for me or to
Hmm.
me if it's supposed to go with me, it'll appear in the next one.
It'll pan out.
And so I left it, and I don't know, either it got bulldozed or some poor
Oh.
schmuck found it and took it home, and now he's being haunted. But
But you know, the stuff in the basement and the cellar could have been there because maybe whoever was there before was trying to clear it out.
also possible. Yeah, that
Yeah.
is
I mean, I don't know, but
that is possible. I did some research. I couldn't really find anything specifically that gave me much insight to the home or what.
I was curious, especially that 413 made me. I was curious. Yeah.
My theory that I put together in this time with the spirits I saw, what I felt, and what was happening is I think there was a couple that lived there that and I feel like there was either there was a fight and a potential murder that happened at 4:13 a.m. I think what I really think is I think a woman found her husband cheating at 4:13 a.m. and killed him and potentially herself or the mistress.
Oh.
And I think something of that nature happened because it was violent. There was fighting, there was yelling, and that's
well, and they showed you the kitchen floor. There was blood.
also
Perhaps,
that I never considered that.
involved.
I never considered that.
They showed it to you because it wouldn't have melted that thawed rather that fast
Oh,
on its own and
right.
drained like that. So I don't know.
So that's
Interesting.
that was my theory and my experience.
So now, have you had experiences in any other places that you've been, or does it really just seem like that was the only place that it happened to you?
I really haven't had anything else
Interesting.
that I would be able to note since then. Yeah.
That's interesting to me. That's interesting as well because the house I grew up in, which my mom still lives there, it has always been very active. Always, nothing ever. Well, there's a couple of spaces that my now almost 30-year-old son and I have talked about separately of each other. We come to those conclusions on our own because he had spent quite a bit of time there in his growing up years. And there were two spaces in that house that we were uncomfortable with. One was an upstairs closet that was a pretty big walk-in closet. And then there was another in the basement. It was a taller crawl space and the basement wasn't a very nice basement, but it was just, those were spaces like you just didn't want to be in those areas. And that closet for a few years of my life was my bedroom, part of off of my bedroom, whatever. But a lot of our experiences there were once my cat died, you would hear him. He was a big, like 13, 15-pound cat. And you'd still hear him jump out of an upstairs window and thud onto the floor and then boom, boom, boom down the stairs. Yeah. So it was interesting because it was animal stuff. But then that was the only place that I can remember I actually had something disappear and reappear. I've never had it happen since then, but I loved Robert Frost. And as a teenager, I had one of his books of poems. Of course, I had The Road Less Taken in it, or The Road Not. I'm going to say it wrong because of what's tattooed on my arm. I'm going to mess up because my arm says take the road less traveled by. But that book disappeared. I tore my bedroom apart. My bedroom was neat, even for a teenage girl. It was just a disaster, or it wasn't a disaster. It was all cleaned up and it was all tidy. And then I walk in there one day and there's the book. You can't miss it. It's laying right in front of you. And I'm like, that hasn't been there for weeks. I'd hunted because I loved it and I hunted and hunted for it. So I'm like, I never understood, but I've never had anything disappear or show up of its own accord any other time.
Yeah.
But when I go other places and people that know that about me, you go, Jaycie, I'm scared to go with you because stuff shows up around you. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But I've seen shadows there. I saw shadows at a house that I house sat at years ago in New Mexico. I mean, the list that I have, I don't even remember them all. I forget them all. Just like I said, the Gadsden Hotel, I'd forgotten about the door locking, and it would sometimes then come back open, which is, again, it's a deadbolt. So how does it do that? But so fascinating.
Yeah. Yep. It was an interesting 5 years, and people still think I'm crazy that I lived there for 5 years with that. But again, I never felt like threatened. I did feel like they weren't paying their share of the rent sometimes. considering they're, but beyond that, it really, and yeah, since then, I've certainly had moments where I'm in places and get creepy feelings, but
Hmm.
nothing that's ever been that visceral again.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know when I went to the Gadsden, which is a very large, anybody that knows anything about the Gadsden Hotel in, it's in Douglas, Arizona. It's was 5 stories in total. It's considered a 4-story, but there's a mezzanine level. And then of course there's the basement level. And they had a speakeasy easy down there. They had a brothel. I mean, this was built in the early 1900s. And I led ghost tours and so forth there when I was there for a few months. And so I never had I ever heard my name called until I worked there.
Mm,
And when you're like, there's no one anywhere around you. And I had it happen 3 times, clear as day, it was my name. And I was blown away by that. And it was the only place I've ever seen a full bodied apparition. I've seen shadows, but I'd never seen a full bodied apparition. Broad daylight, mind you,
wow.
until there. And one of my staff members at the time was sitting in my office. And on the mezzanine level, there's a terrace that goes out over the front, looks out over the street. And the wind kind of blew, and those doors just slammed open. And I looked up because I could see from my office, and I'm like, "What is that guy doing? He's going to tear up the doors." And I was kind of aggravated.
Yeah.
And then I stopped myself and I realized he was it was his side, so it was a silhouette, but you could tell he was all grayed out, but he was a cowboy, looked like he had a duster on. And I'm like, "What?"
Yeah.
And my staff member was like, "I see him," because I looked at her and she's like, "No, I see him too." She knew he wasn't looking like us. And I was out those and up that grand staircase as fast as I could go. I wasn't scared. I don't know what I got into me. I wasn't scared, but there was no one anywhere to be found. And but I had to shut the door back again. And just being in the basement there, which a lot of stuff happened there, because there's tunnels underneath the Gadsden that go to Mexico and go to other places. There's a lot of things that went on there, shady things, the stories say. And but I could be in the basement, which was like a maze, and it just never made me uncomfortable. I always felt like I was welcome there. So I could go anywhere. Almost, there was 1 or 2 places in the whole building I didn't like, but for the most part, I could go anywhere and I just felt comfortable, but I didn't usually feel alone.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, isn't that wild? So wild. Yeah, just interesting. And I think it's great to share these stories because, as active as your place was, some people wouldn't be able to handle that. It's too frightening, but it doesn't have to be frightening. I'm not saying it's not at times, or that we shouldn't pay attention to that, but it doesn't necessarily mean it always would be scary at all. I think, to be honest, in my experience, more often than not, it's not really scary.
Yeah.
They're just trying to get your attention, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting. I have a weird theory that I've
Uh-huh.
concocted over the years, that because I'm kind of a big, not that I'm smart enough to fully understand it, but a big proponent of like string theory and quantum physics and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And I have this theory that potentially these are, because you have universes in
Mhm.
just stacked on top of each other in
Mhm.
theory, right?
Yep.
And I think that some of these, maybe not all, maybe just some of these experiences are universes bumping into each other.
Mhm.
And when that
Yeah.
happens, there's some crossover. And in theory, I think that part of the reason this ghost, we'll call them, may seem so maybe aggressive or scary to you is
Mhm.
because you are also scaring it, because
Yes.
you are entering its
Yep.
reality as also something that is frightening. So there's this
Yep.
cross reaction, and sometimes it's frightening, sometimes it's aggressive, and I
Do
think
you, sorry,
no, I
I
just
agree
think
with you completely. Do you remember, it makes me think of, do you happen to remember, when was that? Early 2000s maybe? But Nicole Kidman was in a movie called The Others. And I'm not usually one to watch
yeah,
super scary movies or anything, but she in this movie was so freaked out, and her children in the movie couldn't be out in the sunlight because they had a health issue. And so she was always closing the curtains, and she was just in a panic because she would come back in. They just felt like there was ghosts in the house. She'd always have to reclose the curtains because something would open them, and open doors, and she's reclosing them. And this whole process went on. And spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't seen the movie and you want to go dig it up and watch it, don't listen to what I'm going to say now. In the end, she was the ghost because
Right.
she had murdered her children and then killed herself. And she
Right.
was the ghost, and the people, the ghosts that were there, were trying to get her out of the house.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting, like, we don't really know. And I'm a proponent also of string theory. Absolutely. And so it's interesting. I hadn't thought of them bumping into each other. I just thought, well, we crossed the veil. Some of us maybe have the ability, or maybe some of the spirits have the ability to kind of cross that veil in between those multiverses. And then, yeah, it shocks us, especially if it's different than what our belief systems might have been or are currently.
Yeah. And there's also the thing is I talked about a lot is just our sight in general, because we you look at other animals, like take elk, for instance. Elk see through a process there. They call it edging, was what an elk. So what an elk sees is much flatter than what we see. It's not as three-dimensional. And also their vision's more based, they see the kind of movement is what really triggers things. So in our hubris as humans, we assume that we see everything you can see. But I think the reality is there's probably a lot of things happening around us that we aren't even able to see with our
Absolutely.
limited scope of vision. I mean, we know that we don't see every color on the color
Yeah.
scale. So that alone shows that we have limited eye capacity or optical capacity, which doesn't, and people never take into consideration, well, what else are we not seeing? What could be happening around us all the time that our vision isn't able to see because it's not
Which
moving.
really gets into the science of the brain, because colors aren't even real. It's a perception. Color is
Sure.
perception.
Yeah.
So we get into biopsych, which I geek out on pretty easily, but I did. It's been too many years since I've studied that now. But it's such a fascinating topic, the whole of it. And I love what you're saying, that there's so much around us. And so some of us are more open or willing to see it, or for whatever reason we just do, or we have these premonitions, we know things. Thank you, Miss Cleo, for running it a few years ago, and everybody thinks we're crazy and lying. But we do, a lot of us do have that. And it's not talked about often because people go, you're cray, or they don't believe you, or they think it's BS or whatnot.
Well,
And instead, we're sitting back here going, what the flip? How did I know that?
I think it's part of the reason that they always say, like, pets and kids are more sensitive to those things, because pets don't have the cognitive ability to understand the scenario, and kids they haven't been taught that is wrong. I think a lot of like ability to see and feel those things is taught out of us by logic, and logic is great in a lot of ways, but logic can also kind of hand wave things that maybe shouldn't be hand waved, and gets our brains to it teaches us to think of everything logically. We're like, no, you didn't see a UFO, it was just a weather balloon, or like, your mind is going to tell you something isn't what it's like when you get attacked. Like if you're in the woods and you get attacked by a bear, your brain starts firing off chemicals and DMT and things to make you think, don't worry, you're not getting attacked. Kids are like, we're gonna make it so you don't remember getting attacked by this bear. It's like it's a trauma response. So instead of the brain going, oh crap, that was a ghost, your brain goes, it's just a shadow, move along, and you're like, oh, just shadow, move along, and you just, because it's a survival mechanism.
Absolutely. So it's we could just sit here and talk about this all day. Because I mean, we're so on a similar wavelength. So I'm fascinated with the conversation. I absolutely could sit here and but I know I have more appointments today and so forth. So I know I can't. But what a fascinating conversation. I want to thank you so much, Deece, for sharing. And you said you tour, right, with your comedy?
Yeah, can I plug a few real quick?
Yes, of course, because I'm like, when and where can I come see
Yeah.
you? I'm like, I've gotten to interview you, and now I want to come see you from the audience perspective.
Yeah, I'm in Arizona occasionally. It's been about a year and a half. I'm sure I'll be back. I tour all over the country all the time. You can find my information at deececomedy.com or
Cool.
deece.comedy on Instagram. I do have a special, Not Your Cup of Tea, which is available for purchase on my website right now. You can, it's called Not Your Cup of Tea because I am not for everyone. Just
Oh,
ask.
here, me too.
uh,
I'm a rebel. I'm definitely not for everybody. I love it. Not your cup of tea. Love it.
The
Go ahead.
nice thing
Sorry.
is right now too, you get to name the price, so you can buy it for whatever you want. You can do it for $5, $10. You can even do $1. It's a dick move, but you'll still get the whole digital download of the
Yeah, that's just
special.
downright rude if people do
Yeah,
that.
it's fine after, it's people have done it. I
Yeah.
still send it to them. So go watch the special. It's really funny. It's stuff I worked on for a long time. I filmed it at my second favorite club in the country, Last Best Comedy Club in Bozeman, Montana. But yeah, check my website for dates. And also, the big thing I'm doing right now is this comic book. It's coming out. You said this episode will come out when, Jaycie?
I will make sure you said that your thing is up till the 16th of October. I'll just make sure I air this before that. I
Great.
promise.
So anytime before October 16th, you can go to Kickstarter and search Kill Stan or follow my the publishing company I run, Inferno.earth, on Instagram, Facebook. That's our website also. There's no .com anymore. It's just Inferno.earth. Um,
Cool.
but yeah, the first issue is coming out soon. You can get in on the campaign. We've got some cool rewards. It's a really awesome story. We've had a ton of great feedback from industry professionals already who love it. It's not your typical vigilante tight superhero comic book. It's really about a lot of mental illness, trauma,
Oh,
and
excellent.
what people are willing to do when they're at the end of the rope and have nothing left to lose. Kind of this feeling of hopelessness and helplessness that I think we've all
Mm-hmm.
felt in our lives. So it's a
Yeah.
really personal and important story, and I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to. If you've never read a comic book, this isn't what you think it's going to be. It's very much a character piece about a guy and his personal journey and trauma. So,
Wow. I love that.
yeah,
That's amazing. I am glad you shared all that with us. Everybody watching and listening, go check that out because I'm promising to air this early October so
thank
that
you.
yeah, absolutely. And go find out, and I'll put the show links, or excuse me, the links in the show notes, of course. So go check these out. Go watch him somewhere. This is really, really cool. And then you can go, oh, I saw him on Carlos and Vanderpeel somewhere. He's got ghost stories too. What the heck?
Right.
So absolutely. And I don't know, I'm going to find him somewhere so I can go see, because I just think that would be such a cool experience to sit here and talk to you and then go, hey,
Yeah,
hi.
absolutely.
So, all right, everybody, but we are out of here for today. Know more about your ghost stories too. So keep your eyes and ears open.